Welcome back to By the Box. By the Box. We are going over Valkyrie's Rage and Wonders of the Sky. If you're new to this series, essentially I'm just going through all the boxes in the game, and I'm talking about the cards that are in them and if these boxes are worth going through them, as the cards apply to the current meta and if they'll see future play. Not really based on historical play, but I'll mention that with some cards. So we're up to the third main box and the third mini box, so we're starting with Valkyrie's Rage here. So as far as great cards in Valkyrie's Rage, I think there's only one, and it doesn't see as much play as it used to, but it pops up now and again depending on the meta, and that card is Divine Wrath. Divine Wrath is just always useful, it's always live, it's very good. All it does is negate a monster effect by discarding a card. And because it's a counter trap card, it's spell speed 3 and it can't be responded to. Now if you play Yu-Gi-Oh! Or you play Duel Links pretty consistently, you know how good the effect of negating a monster's effect is. Used in the right circumstance, it can win you the game by itself, and this card is usually used in decks that can accommodate the cost. Discarding a card is a pretty difficult cost, always has been. However, if a deck can facilitate doing that, then Divine Wrath is a great and excellent card. Like I was saying, it doesn't see a whole lot of competitive play these days, but it's still a great card, and don't be surprised if it pops up in the occasional deck. Now, does this card single-handedly make the box worth going through, like Sphere Kuriboh with Ultimate Rising? Not necessarily, but I would still call it a great card. Now, as for the good cards in the box, the cards that are nice to pick up while you're going after something like Divine Wrath, there's actually a couple in this box that I think are pretty good. One of the cards I think is pretty good is Soul Exchange. It lets you use one of your opponent's monsters for a tribute summon at the cost of giving up your battle phase. Giving up your battle phase is a pretty big cost, however, if you're using it to tribute summon a monster that gains good effects or gains advantage when it's tribute summoned, then this card is still pretty good. However, the bigger thing than actually tribute summoning a monster that will give you advantage when it's tribute summoned, this card is just a good form of removal to a monster on your opponent's side of the field. Now the biggest problem with this card is just that decks don't typically run cards that are tribute summoned. Most people try to avoid that like the plague. So this card just can't find its way into that many decks, but it's still a good card, and if we get like more Monarch support or things along those lines, we could see Soul Exchange see play. Another card I think is pretty okay is Creeping Darkness. Has the effect to banish 2 dark monsters from your graveyard to add a level 4 dark monster from your deck to your hand. Now, searching out monsters from your deck is really strong, especially when you're grabbing a dark monster, which is the most common and probably the best type in Yu-Gi-Oh! And its cost isn't all that bad. It's not necessarily difficult to get 2 dark monsters into the graveyard, and there are even some decks that can gain advantage from banishing these dark monsters. The deck that can make phenomenal usefulness of this card just hasn't hit the game yet, and the card's a little bit slow, and you can't really use it on your first turn unless you have ways to reliably get dark monsters in your graveyard. Going back up to the ultra rares, another card I think is good is Man of Extermination. Has the effect to destroy and remove from play a face-down spell or trap card, and if it was a trap card, both players have to banish any other copies of that trap card from their deck. The card is good because if you're going against a certain deck that you can kind of predict what trap cards they're going to be using, like if you're going against Blue Eyes, it's a pretty safe bet that their set card is Karma Cut or Ultimate Providence or Hollowed Life Barrier. And generally, Blue Eyes decks, they're going to be running multiple copies of this card. Maybe not at the same time as each other, but like if they choose Karma Cut, they're likely going to be running more copies of it. And that's what makes this card pretty good, is you can destroy a Karma Cut right away before it can banish anything on your field, and then you can get rid of any other copies of Karma Cut in your opponent's deck. The problem with it is you just don't really know what you're going to hit, and the card is a lot slower than Mystical Space Typhoon and Cosmic Cyclone. Another problem with the card is that it can be chained to, so let's say you already had a monster on the field and it was turn 3 and you try to use this on a face down Karma Cut, they could just chain to Man of Extermination and still gain the advantage of the Karma Cut by banishing your monster. So the card has two downsides to it, so I don't know if it'll ever see play, especially since Mystical Space Typhoon and Cosmic Cyclone are in the game. However, it's not a bad card to pick up while searching for Divine Wrath. And the last card that I think falls into the good category is actually a rare, and that's Angel 07. Angel 07 has a ridiculously strong effect, and it's just a passive effect while it's on the field. The effects of effect monsters cannot be activated. Something that's so nice about this distinguished effect is it's not on the field, it's just any effect monster. Hand traps in the graveyard, they just can't be activated, and that is one of the strongest effects in the game. And to think a card like this came out in a box this early, you know it has a pretty big downside. And that downside is it only gains this passive effect if it was tribute summoned and it's level 7. So under normal circumstances, you'll need 2 tributes for this card, and that slows it down enough to where it doesn't see that much play. But Resonators recently were able to use this card because they don't use their normal summon. And that's where this card can be live again. If we get more decks that don't necessarily need their normal summon and they can get 2 tributes on the field, or they have a way to get Angel number 7 on the field with only 1 tribute, like one of the effigy monsters, this card could most certainly see play again. Just to see it pop up in Resonators years after it came out kind of attests to the potential the card has. Now, as for okay cards, I think there's really 2, and one of them I'm kind of iffy on, and that's Zing Zen. Its effect is you can activate it by selecting 2 spell or trap cards on the field, and while it remains on the field, they cannot be activated. This card used to be a staple in Duel Links. There wasn't a whole lot of back row removal, so using a card like this was pretty good, especially because most of the trap cards that people were running were battle phase related. And that leads into the kind of detrimental problem with the card is the cards you select can chain themselves to it, so effectively the card can be near enough useless in most situations in the current meta. Not a whole lot of decks run battle phase related trap cards anymore. But what can be said about it is if your opponent has Wall of Disruption and Drowning Mirror Force set, then this card would be really good, but it's not always easy to predict what face downs your opponent has. And of course, the other thing about the card is it being a trap card, it is ridiculously slow. Another card that I think is okay, that is kind of innocuous, is Collego Clawcrow. Collego Clawcrow has the effect if you control a dark monster, you can special summon him. And it's a hard once per turn, so you couldn't special summon multiple copies of him in the same turn. However, the effect to special summon yourself from the hand is always good. The thing about the card is there aren't too many ways to make use of this to get advantage from this yet. With better monsters being released in the game, I see this card popping up in competitive play. The card could already find itself in like a Black Wing deck because it's a Dark Wing Beast type monster. It's another one of those, I'm putting it as an okay card just for its potential. This card could end up being really good in the future, and it's one of those keep your eye on it cards. Overall, Valkyrie's Rage is okay. It's definitely better than Neo Impact. It has a pretty great ultra rare to go after, and not to mention you can pick up cards like Soul Exchange and Creeping Darkness on the way. And there are some cards that you could use in some gimmick decks like Azura Priest that can attack all monsters your opponent controls. So the box is below average, however, better than its predecessor, and you know, getting a Divine Wrath is always going to be nice and useful, so if you really need it for a certain deck, it could be worth going after, and you can pick up some other useful cards on the way. And don't forget, I would only go through this box during a half-off gem sale, which, as you can see, we do have right now. So moving on to the mini box for this episode, we have Wonders of the Sky. It's really bad. You know, it's kind of debatable against Age of Discovery as maybe the worst box in the game, but I think the ultra rares are worse. The Atmosphere and Desert Twister are really, really bad. They're debatably some of the worst ultra rare cards that come out of boxes, especially Desert Twister, and neither of them are worth really anything. So once again, that being said, in the great category, I got nothing here. There's not a great card. However, there are some good cards. I think there's two of them, and they're both rares. So the first card in Wonders of the Sky that I think is good is Soul Absorption. Predominantly in Metaphysis decks, this card was kind of broken in those decks. Very simple effect on a continuous spell card. Every time a card is banished, whether it's banished from your field or your hand or your opponent's, doesn't matter, you gain 500 life points. Metaphysis decks can banish a ton of monsters in a single turn, and they can banish a ton of monsters on your opponent's turn. So they could gain a ridiculous amount of life points from this card. And any other decks that come out that can facilitate this thing of banishing cards super consistently, this card will see play. What I will say is Metaphysis decks did kind of indirectly get a hit from Aloof Lupine being limited to reel in the power of Thunder Dragons. However, Metaphysis decks could still be a decent rogue presence, so this card could see play. But it's another one of those. I think it's been really good for a while just because of Metaphysis decks, and if there's more decks or archetypes that can make this a huge advantage for them, this card will definitely see play. You could play it in a Stromberg deck and banish 10 cards from your deck face down and gain 5,000 life points from that. The problem with that is the consistency of it. You can't guarantee that you're going to have a Soul Absorption in your hand and that it won't be one of the 10 cards you banish face down. And then the other card I think is good, I misspoke, this one actually isn't a rare, it's a common, and that's a Pointer of the Red Lotus. A Pointer of the Red Lotus has the effect to pay 2,000 life points, and then you have to show your hand to your opponent. But then your opponent shows you their hand, and you can banish a card from their hand until your opponent's next end phase. Ripping cards from your opponent's hand is extremely strong, and that's why it's kind of a rare effect, and a Pointer of the Red Lotus is one of the only cards in Duel Links that can actually do this. Most of the cards in Duel Links that can manipulate your opponent's hand, they activate during the battle phase or when they inflict battle damage, so they're super easy to deal with before they could ever even activate that effect. However, a Pointer of the Red Lotus is a lot easier to use than those cards. It is a trap card, so it is slower, but some decks can actually make advantage of its kind of ridiculous cost of paying 2,000 life points. In Duel Links, that's half your life points. However, there are skills like Destiny Draw and pre-nerf Cyber Style, and Cyber Dragons were running this card for a while, to be able to facilitate Cyber Style to summon Proto Cyber Dragons while also banishing a card from your opponent's hand. It's just very strong. It's played a lot in the TCG, and again, with the right support, this card could be really good. And that's kind of it for the good and okay cards, and then I have just one honorable mention, and not for its ability in competitive play whatsoever, however, for its farming ability in Duel Links, and that's Localized Tornado. This card is really bad for you. You shuffle all cards from your hand and graveyard into the deck. This will never be good for you, ever. So it's really, really a bad card. And it being so bad, it's really good to give to your opponent. And like I was saying, that is not in any competitive capacity whatsoever. However, when you're farming for game mats, you are trying to summon monsters multiple times to get these game mats, and that's facilitated by loops, and you want to be able to perform these loops as much as possible. So by using a card called Graceful Tear, you can give this to the CPU. They will set it, and they will use it when they're about to deck out. So that way, you can perform the loops more times before the CPU decks out, and they will just reset their entire hand and graveyard, and the duel will go to turn 50. So turn 50 is when it ends in a draw. That's as long as duels can go. But being able to have 50 turns to perform loops to summon monsters to get game mats, because a lot of these game mats you can only get them by summoning the monster that is on the game mat 100 times, and that can be such a pain for some of them. So Localized Tornado is an honorable mention, not for any competitive reason at all. It's terrible. However, it is useful in Duel Links. It's extremely useful, actually, for farming. Overall, Wonders of the Sky is bad, but if you're trying to build a Metaphysis deck, it's worth going through to get copies of Soul Absorption, because it's a rare, it's not hard to pull. And along the way, you're almost guaranteed to pull a copy of a Pointer of the Red Lotus, which is a good card, and it's useful, and you will likely get a Localized Tornado as well, which will help you farm for game mats. So while this box is bad, I actually do think it's worth going through depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Even at the very least, I know everyone wants some of those really cool game mats with the boss monsters on them. So guaranteeing yourself a copy of Localized Tornado, not bad. Same caveat, I would only do it during a half-off gem sale. But for weird reasons, this one is a lot better to go through than the previous mini boxes. So that's it for episode 3 of Buy the Box. I really enjoy making these videos and just talking about these boxes, and I think it's going to only get more fun. So if you're liking them too, and you're learning some things from them, getting some helpful tips on these older boxes, then like the video, consider subscribing. I would appreciate it. I am going to go through every box in the game. We're going from top to bottom, so the next time we're going to be doing this, it'll be Chaotic Compliance and Land of the Titans. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode of this.